Oh, hey, it's already Chapter 13 of Kappo and The Rev's KATR Classics production of Anne of Green Gables, and even I, Kappo, the one and only Marilla C. Cuthbert, can't imagine the place without Anne. It's only been 3 weeks since she's transformed our stuffy, button-down lives into a rich tapestry of... what the... a pile of 3 days' worth of sewing stacked in the corner, and a morning's dishes stacked in the sink.
Marilla Cuthbert fumed as she teeter-tottered between an awestruck feeling of loving affection and a head-clamped rage. She had always been known as one of the most unchanging, steadfast, if not completely stubborn women in all of Canada, and here she was caught mooning over an orphan girl who had left the day's worth of dishes curdling in the basin while she cavorted and capered with her new bosom friend, Diana Barry.
Truth was, Marilla had barely spoken a word to Anne over the past few days. In fact, it felt like she hadn't spoken to much of anybody in the past week at all. It almost seemed like the old times before Anne had arrived. The hot, yellow, drowsy heat had kept the entire province seeking shade. Yet Anne Shirley had been a whirling dervish of manic activities, mostly involving dragging Diana on a tour of Avonlea.
Marilla looked out to see that Anne wasn't out on some grand afternoon adventure at all, but was perched up top the fence post speaking with Matthew as he slowly turned up the weeds in the flower bed beneath the post.
I told her to be back here nearly an hour ago.
Marilla stewed as she peeked through the drawn shades.
Matthew noticed the flash of white in the window from the corner of his eye. Anne noticed Matthew noticed the flash of white drapery in the window and froze and erected a statue atop the fence post and said,
"Oh, Matthew, I hate disappointing Marilla." "Yep,"
Matthew stated, drawing a long and thoughtful breath like a polished statesman, and said,
"Yeah, thank you, Matthew,"
Anne said as she jumped off the fence post and bounced to the ground, giving Matthew a peck on the cheek with a smile.
"How do you face Marilla when you disappoint her?"
Anne asked with the look of a condemned criminal.
"I don't know. I never thought much of it."
Matthew smiled.
"Matthew Cuthbert, you are such a rogue. This is terrible timing. I need to ask Marilla about the picnic, and I'm late coming home, and I'm almost sure I left the dishes this morning, and I've been leaving my sewing until evenings, and then when I get home, I'm way too tired to do it. Every night as I lay in bed, I promise myself to hurry it the next day, but then the next day comes and I'm captured by my own wild, untamed spirit, and I just run headlong into the day."
Anne stopped for a breath and looked up at Matthew, who could only shake his head, hold back a laugh, and point to the door at the kitchen of Green Gables.
Anne streaked across the yard, her mind lit afire with ideas on how to handle this situation of a house full of undone chores, a steaming Marilla Cuthbert, and a pending invitation to the Sunday picnic hanging in the balance.
Anne swirled past Marilla without a word, and before Marilla could even begin scolding her, Anne's hands were plunged into the cold, scummy water and the dishes were clanking about. Anne launched into her planned routine.
"Oh, Marilla, there's to be a picnic next Sunday."
Had Anne waited a moment further, in order for Marilla to apply her much-deserved tongue-lashing, perhaps things would have gone differently. Had Marilla been able to clear her mind of the week's anxiety and get her good talking to in with Anne about the ways and means at Green Gables, a picnic might have sounded like a perfect thing. However, now this presumptuous picnic was lumped together alongside all these other childish irresponsibilities. "What time did I ask you to return home?"
Marilla said so coldly it seemed to drop the temperature of the humid room by several degrees. "Well, you said 2 p.m., Ms. Cuthbert,"
Anne said with a prompt smile. "It is 2:45, and..."
Marilla began, but was interrupted by Anne. "Oh, I was home by 2, Marilla, a few minutes before even,"
Anne said as her smile began to gain strength.
"I was out on the drive with Matthew, watching him weed the center rounds and telling him all about this picnic." The word picnic had suddenly become a curse word at Green Gables, alongside the likes of Blewett, Blythe, and Cucumber.
"When I tell you to return home, you are to report to me. Bothering Matthew for half the afternoon does not count as crossing the finish line."
Marilla stepped towards Anne and noticed her sweaty aroma as well as dirt caked to the hem of her dress. "I apologize, Marilla. I'll get to the dishes and then right to my sewing,"
Anne said as she sprang back into action, pouring a kettle of hot boiling water over the pile of plates, cups, and silver.
I'd rather be Anne of Green Gables doing patchwork sewing and dirty dishes than Anne any other place playing all day.
Those chores should have never been left. You haven't been home all week.
Marilla looked as if she might cry. Well, Marilla, it was just this morning that Reverend Allen preached, "For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it must be put to death." Exodus chapter 35, verse 2. Marilla found herself in the awkward position of either disagreeing with the Bible or admitting she'd committed a mortal sin.
My girl, I won't have any more twisting of scripture in this home. Why, it was just this week that those terrible heathen cult Jehovah's Witnesses came to the door with their wanton prattle. As a firm Bible believer, I threw their shoddy theology out the door and walked them up to the crossroads of Avonlea. You could hear a few cheers come up from Main Street from the small crowd that gathered when Angus, Iverson, and I gave them the final kick in the pants. A cordial knock was heard upon the door at Green Gables. Anne and Marilla both wondered who it could be, as nobody was expected, and if it were Rachel Lynde, a
Yoo-hoo, Marilla!
would have been followed, or a from Angus Iverson, or maybe even the peace, love, and disrespect of hit radio show hosts Kappo
and The Rev. Marilla went to the door quickly and quietly when she saw that it was indeed Angus Iverson. His hair was combed and his clothes were clean and dry. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and a bright, shining, glimmering golden brooch.
I don't know how many times I have to give this brooch to you, Miss Cuthbert.
Angus smiled.
But I do enjoy it each time. Marilla had playfully tossed the brooch at Angus out the window in a previous episode of Kappo and The Rev's Anne of Green Gables, and had done so on several occasions over the many years. Anne exclaimed,
"Oh my, Marilla, what a stunning and amazing brooch. May I see it?"
"No,"
Marilla said coldly, looking up at the rafters. "Hello, Mr. Iverson,"
Anne said with a smile.
"Why, what's that on your pantaloons? It looks and smells a lot like blood."
"Oh, why, yes, my girl. That brooch pin is quite a beast."
"What?"
Anne said worriedly. "Never mind all of this, Anne. Forget about the brooch. Forget about Angus and just go up to your room for a while,"
Marilla commanded. "Could I just see the brooch for a moment? To pin it on like the Lady of Shalott?"
"No, you may not. Go upstairs at once."
Marilla was raising her voice higher than usual, and she felt the Cuthbert rage begin to bubble and boil under her skin.
"Well, Marilla, fancy a walk around the cucumber patch?"
Angus asked with a hopeful smile and a bit of a bulge from his bloody pantaloons.
"Get out of here, you fool!"
Marilla said as she grabbed a fistful of smaller silver and bronze brooches and launched them fearfully at Angus. A shotgun blast of brooches tore the doorway, and several of them struck Angus and sent him careening backwards off the veranda and into the sun-drenched autumn evening. "Oh, a fistful of brooches makes the Iverson go down in the most delightful way."
Anne retired to the east gable and sat lightly upon her bed as she took to her chores of sewing and darning the 3 days' worth of clothing that had been piled up in the corner of the room. However, she couldn't fully concentrate as the vision of the fantastic brooch filled her mind. She saw Angus Iverson leaving down the drive and thought to call after him and ask about the origins of the brooch, but as she called to him, Angus didn't hear her, as she could hardly raise her voice above that of a cooing pigeon in the rafters without alerting Marilla. That goddamn brooch has been nothing but trouble. I hope it doesn't cause Anne any drama in the next chapter of Kappo and The Rev's Anne of Green Gables.